Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page, and it is Tuesday, October 19th, 2021, and hope everybody's doing well today. Got some folks joining on here, and let me see who we've got so far. There's Linda and Sheila. Good morning. Connie. And there's Gail. We've got others who are on the stream as well. Got a bit of good news. I can go live now on Facebook, finally. My restriction is over. And so I don't have to run through a separate account like I was doing before. And I am happy about that. Takes away some of the complications, I guess you'd say. Hey, Brian, good to see you. All right, we are going to start today just kind of thinking about some things that we talked about yesterday. I would say the ongoing debate about creationism versus Darwinian evolution. And, and by the way, since I'm not restricted anymore, I'm also cross-posting to the Near Churches page again. So things are seemingly back to normal. We'll see how long that lasts. Good morning, Michelle. Yes, I'm out. And it was so weird, that Facebook restriction, because the only restriction was I couldn't go live. I could post anywhere I wanted to. I just couldn't do a live video like this through my profile. So, and the restriction came because of a post that I had made like 4 years ago that I hadn't reshared or anything. It was just they went back 4 years ago and they saw that and they're like, okay, we're restricting him because it wasn't offensive back then, but it's offensive now, so we're going to restrict him. And we see that kind of stuff happening more and more with, what we call big tech, digging back into people's past and finding things that were not offensive then that are considered offensive now. And, well, we're going to cancel them, we're going to fire them. And I don't suppose that'll be getting any better anytime soon, but whatever the case may be, here we are. All right, so the discussion between creationism versus Darwinian evolution, or intelligent design versus evolution, phrased differently by different folks, and it's a debate that I suppose it'll never end. I told you yesterday I've got Darwin's the Origin of Species, and I've read that, and I've read other evolutionary works, I guess you'd say, that supposedly bolster the concept of what I refer to as strictly naturalistic or materialistic evolution. Okay, life as we have it today, from nothing but essentially time and chance. And I know that's an oversimplified definition, and a person well-versed in evolutionary theory could probably tear that apart, but when you really get down to it, that's what it is. It's everything that we have today started with an explosion billions of years ago of small particles. For some reason, they decided to explode. And in some way, over a long period of time, and by a multitude of chances, here we are. Very complex, very intricate, intelligent, moral beings. And just it's all by time and chance. I mean, that's when you break it down to its simplest form, that's what we're dealing with. There's Anil from India. Good to have you. There's Diana. There's Barry and Glenda. Good to see all of you on the stream today. So the original question was not necessarily talking about evolution, but I think that's an important part of the discussion, because the question was about dinosaurs, okay? And dinosaurs in the Bible. And the word dinosaur is not found in the Bible, and that's true. And it wasn't in the English language until I think the year was either 1841 or 1842. But it's interesting to note that throughout history, and this is cross-cultural, there are these stories about great dragons, okay? some land-dwelling dragons, some who could fly. And again, it what's the word? It's not limited to just one group of people. And like I said yesterday, there are some who consider themselves to be creationists, believe in God and the Word of God, that don't believe that dinosaurs were ever real. They believe they're what we hear so often today, a social construct. Okay, it was something made up by society. Well, we know that's not true. That's obviously ridiculous because the evidence is abundant. So one thing I learned yesterday in looking at some things is if you want to find the most apparently fossils, you would look either in the northwestern United States or China or Argentina. And there's an abundance of fossils and graveyards, as they call them, of dinosaurs. And so we it's freely admitted that they did exist and things of this nature, as well as some artwork that has been discovered over the years. And it's interesting. So I wrote a couple of those things down. The Havasupai Canyon in the American West, cave paintings, wall drawings, things like this. The Tapram Temple, which was built in the 12th century AD. Okay, so what is that? 900 years ago, has a variety of carvings, and you can tell what animals they are. And then you have one that, when you look at it, it's what we would call a stegosaurus. And I saw an explanation of that by an evolutionist. They said that's not a stegosaurus, that's a I think they said a hippopotamus with leaves over it. Well, that's a pretty good bit of imagination you would have to see that. But you have these evidences that people hundreds of years ago were telling these stories, again, cross-culturally, telling these stories about dragons, and again, some that dwelt on the land, some that could fly, and you have these works of art that are hundreds of years old. Well, if nobody had ever seen, and see, that's one of the key things of evolution, is that the dinosaurs lived 230 million years ago up to about 60 to 65 million years ago, and humans never interacted with them. Well, if that is the case, then why are these artworks found in different parts of the world from hundreds of years ago, before dinosaurs were even beginning to be discovered in the fossil record? How could that have happened if they didn't coexist at some point in time? So one of the things we looked at yesterday from the biblical perspective is in Genesis chapter 1, verses 24 through 28, when God on the sixth day created all of these land-dwelling creatures, including man and woman. And the creationist, the person who believes in intelligent design and who looks at the Genesis account of creation as a historical account and not as a mythological or spiritual account, as some people have tried to make it, everything that dwells on the land and in the sea, by the way, was created in, according to the record, the creation week. Now, there's something to that. And so we talked about all that yesterday, but I want to focus in more today on the book of Job, beginning in chapter 38. So throughout the book of Job is a book of cycles, speech cycles, you might say. Job wonders about his, we'll call it his oppression, what he's facing, and he wants to talk to God because from his perspective, the Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Remember, that's what he said in chapter 1. But that's an incorrect conclusion. Job did not know all that had occurred that is recorded for us in chapter 1, but his conclusion is, well, God is doing this to me. And of course, we know his three friends come to comfort him, and their conclusion is, well, you must have done something wrong. Nobody ever suffers innocently. And so throughout the book, my point is this, throughout the book, Job pleads to talk with God. He wants his chance to essentially to stand in court before the judge and plead his innocence. Beginning in chapter 38, God gives him that, you might say, God gives him that opportunity. But here's how God does it. So Job throughout the book wants to know why. Okay, I've done this and this and this, and I haven't done this or this, and so why am I suffering to this extent? If I could just stand before God and have him tell me why. That's what Job wants. And so beginning in Job 38, Job has been given that opportunity, but God starts by asking questions. God doesn't tell him why. So, Job 38:1, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Okay, so we're talking to the creator of the universe here. And it's like, well, who do you think you are, Job? All right, you want your chance? Well, here it is. Answer some questions first. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And so chapters 38 and through 39, he goes through creation, and he's asking Job, if you want your chance, then you need to answer these questions, but you can't. And then an interesting thing that he does here specifically in chapter 39 is he gets very specific with creation. So let me go ahead and say this first. When we get to chapters 40 and 41, we have these two creatures. Chapter 40, beginning in verse 15, the Behemoth, and all of chapter 41 talks about the Leviathan. So God is talking about his creative power to Job, and, well, if you can answer these questions, I'll answer your question. But notice in chapter 39, he gets very specific with things he's created. Verse 1, the wild mountain goats. Verse 5, the wild donkey. Verse 9, the wild ox. Verse 13, the ostrich. Verse 19, the horse. Verse 26, the hawk. And verse 27, the eagle. And he's very specific about the nature of these animals and how they exist and what they do. These are not mythological creatures. All right? And then when you get to Job chapter 40 and verse 15, he says, look now at the behemoth. Okay, so look at all these other animals, and then he pulls in this other one. And then notice this, which I made along with you. Okay, so that corresponds with what Moses recorded in Genesis chapter 1, that on day 6, God created the land-dwelling animals and man and woman. So look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. And he describes this beast, whatever it is, okay? He eats grass like an ox, so an herbivore, we'd say. His strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. It's interesting, so I have a lot of commentaries, and one of the commentaries I was looking at said that it's in agreement here by scholars, and I use that term loosely, it's in agreement among scholars that this is the hippopotamus. But then you have to ask yourself a question. He moves his tail like a cedar. Doesn't exactly fit the description of a hippopotamus. Some scholars say it was an elephant. Well, look at an elephant's tail. There's quite a difference between that and what's described here. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs are like bars of iron. Then he says this in verse 19. He is the first of the ways of God. I think the King James uses the word chief, and this has to do with rank. So whatever this creature is, its bone structure is massive. Its tail is massive. It's an herbivore. And then it says it's the chief or the first of the ways of God. And this, again, has to do with rank. Some say perhaps it has to do with size. You're not going to get any bigger or stronger than this animal, whatever that may be. And then notice this in verse 19. This is interesting. Only he who made him can bring him near his sword. So, God made him. I mean, he says that back up in verse 15. But then, if you're going to attack this thing with a sword, well, it's not going to work out too well for you. The only one that could do that would be God. So again, that talks to us about the size, perhaps, and the strength of this behemoth, this beast, whatever it may be. The mountains yield food for him. All the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus tree in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. So it goes on describing his nature. The point being, his size, his strength. The description of his bones there in verse 18, like beams of bronze and bars of iron. You think about all the animals that we exist with on the earth today, and there are some massive animals, land-dwelling and sea creatures. And in fact, some of the sea creatures we have are bigger than any dinosaur that's ever been discovered. Bigger in length and in weight, by the way. I think the assumption a lot of times is, well, humans couldn't have cohabited with dinosaurs because they were so ferocious. And typically, I think we think of like the Tyrannosaurus Rex, okay, walking on two big legs and just ferocious teeth, a meat eater. Well, that's not the only kind of dinosaur that existed. And even evolutionists and those who study the fossil record tell us that the average size of dinosaurs, there were huge ones, there's no doubt about that. There were small ones, but the average size overall was about the size of a full-grown cow. Okay, so we've got a lot of those that roam around the earth that are big and strong, and no human can, with this creature here, no human can approach it and kill it and tame its strength. And yet you think about the animals that humans today can approach and have approached and tamed and used. We went to SeaWorld, several years ago and watched the killer whale show. Just amazing what those things can be trained to do. And elephants who have been trained and used even in battle historically. What was it? Carthage used them against the Romans. But anyway, they're still used today throughout different parts of the world. And lions are tamed and used and all of this stuff. But this beast here is so massive and so strong, that's not going to happen. I see a comment has come up here. This is always fun, so I'm able to go live today, and I got into Facebook Live, and it looks totally different than it did the last time I used it, so... Okay, so about the term dragon, Sheila Cole says, I'm asking this because one would have to know what a dragon looks like to understand the term and reference to it. And again, that's one of the interesting things throughout cultures, throughout history, and again, throughout the history before dinosaur fossils and graveyards were even discovered, you have, unanimous, you might say unanimous agreement that there were these dragons that people saw. There's something to that, okay? Anyway, so that's Behemoth, and then you get to Leviathan here in Job chapter 41. And remember, this is all within the context of what God has created along with man. Job 40 and verse 15. And these other creatures, the ox, the ostrich, the horse, the hawk, the eagle, that are mentioned throughout chapter 39. But Leviathan, he can't be drawn out with a hook or snare his tongue with a line which you lower. Can you put a reed through his nose? So, we think of like dangerous water-dwelling animals. You think of alligators, crocodiles, sharks, killer whales, all these things that we see today. And we know that people hunt those things and eat those creatures even. You think of native Alaskans and some of the hunts that they do for whales. Pretty amazing stuff, but this one, not so. You're not going to do this. Job 41:5, will you play with him, Leviathan, as with a bird, or will you leash him for your maidens? And again, you think about the creatures that man has tamed and leashed and used for food or for service, for their benefit. Job 41:9, indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? Well, okay, so what's the sight of him? Job 41:13, who can remove his outer coat? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face with his terrible teeth all around? Just visualize this. Who's going to control this beast and his teeth? His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. Remember, this is God describing this creature that he created. They're joined one to another, they stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. I don't know what do you say about that? I mean, what's being described here? There's actually, and I told you this yesterday, if you go to the Apologetics Press website, I've actually got a couple books that they did. One is called Truth Be Told, and there's actually a DVD that goes along with that, and the other one is called Dinosaurs Unleashed. So if you go to apologeticspress.org, you can look up all this stuff, and they have videos on their website that are free of charge. You can also order the DVDs or the books, but they actually got an artist to read this text here, what we just read, from verses 12 down through verse, pretty much the whole chapter. Let's just say that. And there's an artist's conception of what this beast would look like. And it's pretty amazing when they just take that description and an artist lays it out on paper or canvas. So, strength dwells in his neck, verse 22, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. So there's this constant emphasis in these verses of what his, as it refers to it in verse 13, his outer coat. Okay, he's scaly beast, whatever this thing is, and he's got a terrifying set of teeth, and out of his mouth goes burning light. Sparks of fire shoot out. You're not going to tame this creature, whatever it may have been. All right? But then I get down to verse 25, Job 41:25. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. Darts are regarded as straw. He laughs at the threat of javelins. Again, you think of all the creatures that men hunt today and that regularly kill. And whatever this thing was, that's not going to happen. This is quite the creature. And so then you get down to Job 41:33. And remember, this is all in the context of Job wanting to know why he's enduring what he's enduring and wanting to stand before God and have God answer him. Well, the Lord turns the tables and said, it's essentially like Jesus did on one occasion, you answer my question, then I'll answer yours. Well, Job has no answer here. It's not possible. Let's see. Okay, so there's something that this beast does with water too. Job 41:31. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him so he can swim. One would think the deep had white hair. On earth there is nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. The implication is this is a tall creature, whatever it may be. He is king over all the children of pride. Very interesting description, obviously. And when you think about the description, the scales, the strength, the fact that this thing is untamable and unkillable by man, unapproachable, and he beholds every high thing. This is quite a tall creature. And God made him. Well, what are we talking about? Again, you think about the fact that throughout history and cross-culturally, you have all of these stories of dragons and even ancient artist conceptions of these things. Where did they get that idea? Where did they get the thoughts of what these things might look like? There has to be something to that. So if you hold to the belief that in 6 days God created the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything that is in them, and there's no reason to doubt that those 6 days are anything but 6 days. And the evidence for that is in Exodus chapter 20, where God told Israel, you work for 6 days and rest on the seventh, because God worked on 6 days and rested on the seventh. And we need to understand what that word rested mean. God didn't have to sit down and take a breather. The work ceased. The creative processes, those miraculous creative processes, ceased after the 6th day. And so the instruction to Israel was, that's how you work, 6 days, and you cease on the 7th. It was within that 6-day period that the Behemoth and the Leviathan were created along with man. Again, that's, I know I've said this a couple times, but that's Job 40 and verse 15. So, if it is the case that dinosaurs existed, and you'd have to be a fool to deny that, and if it is also the case that there is an intelligent designer who has given us an account of what he did in the creative process, then you have to come to one conclusion, and that is that man and dinosaur were not separated by, 65 million years? I think that's the right number. But at some point in time, they coexisted, and at some point in time, they became extinct. Now, the people are like, well, so here's an interesting thing. Most people believe that the dinosaurs went extinct when a huge meteor hit the earth and an ice age set in, and they weren't adapted to that colder weather. There's some interesting things to read, too, about the Genesis account of the universal flood and how that changed weather patterns and the climate worldwide, especially when you look at the Genesis, the creation account of Eden and the description of the climate that existed at that time. Everything changed after the flood. But the question is, okay, so people say that's when the dinosaurs went extinct at the time of that meteor or whatever. Why just them? I mean, if you're going to take that position, why was it just the dinosaurs? And they may say, well, there were some other creatures. But why was there a mass extinction of just one type of animal? Why wasn't there a mass extinction of humanity if the climate changed so much? So there are a lot of questions that are not answered. I would say they're just assumed by evolutionists and those who hold to an ancient Earth. And of course, they'd say the same thing about us, that there are a lot of assumptions of a young Earth and a young creation and a cohabitation of dinosaurs with men. But when you look at these descriptions here in Job chapters 40 and 41 of these two creatures, to me it speaks of something more than a elephant or a hippopotamus or anything like that. Quite a different creature from those. So, anyway. Well, let me look over here real quick. I've gone a little bit longer than I had intended to. I don't see any further questions or comments. I'm going to go ahead and shut her down for today, but it's good to see you all. If you have any further questions or comments on this, you can, if you would like, send me a private message, or you can access the comment section here or on yesterday's video. And I will go further, but I don't really know. Again, I would send you to apologeticspress.org because there's so much valuable information there. And I think tomorrow we're going to start Ezekiel. I think that's the plan. So unless you have something further, and I'll be happy to address that. But I appreciate you guys being on here today. And, well, if you have somebody who doesn't do Facebook, they'd like to see all this content, send them to our YouTube channel, Mammoth Spring Church of Christ, and we upload all of our stuff like this there every day, and it stays fresh every day with new content. So I appreciate you guys being on here. Thank you, Connie, and I appreciate you being on here. All right, guys, well, I suppose that's it for today. I hope you have a good day, and hope to see you back here tomorrow at 11, and I think we're going to start the book of Ezekiel. I think that's what we'll do. All right, guys, have a good day, and hope to see you here tomorrow.